You feel pain like no other pain, and you know that in your life it's going to be very difficult to...
The future king finally broke because the one story he had guarded his entire life, the real Diana, not the polished version the palace preferred, was being quietly contained without the family who had known her longest. The image of a 15-year-old prince walking behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London revealed more than public duty could ever contain. It exposed a fracture between institutional obligation and private devastation that has shaped every subsequent chapter of Prince William's life. That single act of endurance, performed while the world watched, became the visible expression of a grief that no palace schedule or official narrative has ever fully resolved. Decades later, the same tension between the Spencer family's determination to keep Diana's story whole and the monarchy's instinct to manage its own history continues to surface in private rooms where titles give way to the raw claims of blood and memory. Robert Lacey, in his book Battle of Brothers described how the 1995 Panorama interview left the young William distraught and angry, a schoolboy forced to absorb his mother's public account of a marriage that had already collapsed. The revelation that Diana had also been unfaithful struck him with particular force because he had already witnessed the pain his father's relationship with Camilla had caused. Lacey records that William's housemaster found him slumped and red-eyed, the first of many moments in which the boy who would one day be king struggled to reconcile the mother he loved with a public figure whose life had become national property. That early wound never fully closed. It reappeared in different forms as William grew into his role, married, and began raising his own children with a conscious intention of giving them what he had been denied, an unfiltered connection to the grandmother they would never meet. Tina Brown's The Palace Papers traces the parallel and often painful evolution of Camilla's place within the same family. Brown shows how Camilla's acceptance was never simply a personal matter. It required the gradual rewriting of a story in which she had been cast, for years, as the other woman in Diana's marriage. Every step of Camilla's rehabilitation carried the shadow of that earlier narrative. For William, supporting his father's happiness while protecting the memory of the woman who had raised him created a private balancing act that no public statement could fully express. The monarchy's need for stability and the son's need for honesty have rarely aligned without cost. Earl Spencer's 1997 funeral eulogy made that cost explicit. Standing in Westminster Abbey, he described his sister as the most hunted person in the modern age and pledged that he and the Spencer family would protect William and Harry so that their souls are not simply immersed by duty, but can sing openly. The words were delivered in the presence of the Queen and the then Prince of Wales. They were not a private complaint. They were a public promise made beside Diana's coffin. Spencer later revealed that he had tried to prevent the two boys from walking in the procession, believing it would be too much for them, only to be told they wished to do so. He has since said he was misled. That episode, more than any later rumor, established a pattern of Spencer family vigilance over how Diana's story would be told and who would control access to the private record of her life. At Althorpe, the family estate where Diana is buried on an island in the lake, Spencer has maintained an archive of letters, photographs, and personal effects that offer a portrait of his sister before and beyond her royal years. The estate remains in Spencer hands. Under male primogeniture, it will pass to Spencer's son Louis rather than to Diana's own children. William and Harry have always been welcome there as family, yet the distinction between the royal household's official commemorations and the Spencer family's private guardianship has created recurring friction over guest lists, archival access, and the framing of memorial events. These are not dramatic conspiracies but the ordinary workings of two institutions, one royal, one aristocratic, each convinced it holds a truer claim on Diana's legacy. William has spoken repeatedly about his determination that his children should know their grandmother as a real person rather than a public icon. In the 2017 documentary Diana, 7 Days he described the funeral as one of the hardest things he had ever done and explained that he had tried to honor his mother by living a life she would have been proud of. He has returned to that theme in later interviews, emphasizing emotional openness with his own sons and daughter. When discussions arise about how future generations will encounter Diana, through palace-approved narratives, through the Spencer archive at Althorpe, or through the unfiltered stories that only family can tell, the stakes are never merely administrative. They touch the part of William that still carries the 15-year-old boy who lost his mother in circumstances the world would not stop discussing. It is in this accumulated history that any private family conversation about legacy acquires its emotional charge. When Spencer has raised concerns that certain administrative decisions were gradually limiting direct Spencer involvement in commemorative planning or in arrangements that would allow his sister's grandchildren easier, more personal access to her story, he has done so as the man who once stood in Westminster Abbey and made a promise on her coffin. William, caught between his uncle's guardianship and his own position as heir, has had to weigh institutional caution against the simple desire of children to know the grandmother who exists in photographs, letters, and family memory. Charles, whose own relationship with Diana remains the most complicated thread in the tapestry, has had to listen as both father and king. Camilla, whose every public gesture has been measured against Diana's ghost, has defended the need for coordinated messaging while carrying the knowledge that any defense of institutional boundaries can be read as self-protection. In such a room, the composure expected of the future king can falter. William has shown emotion publicly when speaking of loss. He has fought back tears in interviews discussing the human cost of tragedy and has spoken openly about mental health in ways that echo his mother's own emphasis on feeling rather than hiding. The tears that surface in private when decades of managed grief, institutional pressure, and family loyalty collide are not a collapse of duty. They are the evidence that duty and love have never been fully separable in his life. Charles has witnessed this before. He has seen the same hurt in his son that he once saw in the boy who returned from the funeral procession. The difference now is that William is no longer a child waiting for an adult to defend his mother. He is a father asking that his own children not inherit the same divided inheritance of memory. The monarchy has survived by absorbing such moments and continuing. After any private reckoning, statements are issued, schedules are adjusted, and the public sees only the continuation of service. Yet the deeper adjustment happens in the silence that follows. William has emerged from these tensions with a clearer determination to lead a more inclusive approach to his mother's legacy, one that gives the Spencer family a formal place in decisions about archives, memorials, and the stories told to the next generation. Spencer has secured the assurance that the promise he made in 1997 extends to Diana's grandchildren. Charles has been reminded that fatherhood and kingship cannot be kept in separate compartments when the subject is the woman who shaped both. Camilla has continued her own path, aware that acceptance is never final when it rests on the foundation of another woman's tragedy. What endures is not the drama of any single evening but the quieter truth that Diana's greatest influence on the monarchy may be the insistence, still felt decades after her death, that institutions must ultimately answer to the human beings who live inside them. William's willingness to show vulnerability, whether in a private room or in public remarks about grief, has already changed the tone of the royal family in ways his mother would have recognized. Spencer's guardianship of the archive at Althorpe ensures that the version of Diana preserved for her grandchildren will include the laughter, the contradictions, and the ordinary humanity that official narratives sometimes smooth away. Charles and Camilla have learned, through years of careful navigation, that the past cannot be edited without cost to the present. In the end, the tears William has shed, both those the public has seen and those that remain behind closed doors, are not a sign of weakness in the line of succession. They are the proof that the line still runs through a son who remembers his mother as a person before she became a symbol. The monarchy continues because it has learned, however slowly, that the strongest institutions are those willing to make room for the full, unmanageable weight of love and loss. Diana's legacy is no longer a contest between palace and family. It has become, at its best, a shared responsibility carried by a father who refuses to let his children inherit only the polished version of the woman who gave them their history. That is the inheritance William is determined to protect, not with silence, but with the honesty his mother once asked of the world and that he now asks of himself. The public sees only the continuation of service, the tree planting, the hospital visits, the open talk about mental health. Behind those visible acts lies the quieter work of a son who refused to let grief be managed into something smaller than it was. Spencer continues to guard the archive with the same ferocity he showed in 1997. Charles and Camilla move forward knowing that acceptance is never final when it rests on another woman's tragedy. The monarchy endures because it has learned, however slowly, that the strongest crowns are those that can bend under the full weight of love and loss without pretending the past has been settled. What followed was not reconciliation in the cinematic sense. There were no dramatic embraces or public admissions. There was a private agreement that future decisions about Diana's legacy, memorials, archival access, the stories told to her grandchildren, would include formal Spencer family participation. William would chair a more inclusive structure. Spencer secured the assurance that the promise made on his sister's coffin would extend to the next generation. Charles accepted that fatherhood and kingship could not be kept in separate rooms when the subject was the woman who had shaped both. Camilla stepped back from any further role in shaping that particular legacy, understanding that some wounds close only when control is released. William left the room shaken but clearer. The tears had not weakened him. They had confirmed what he already knew. His mother's greatest gift to the monarchy was never her title or her public work. It was the insistence, still felt 30 years later, that institutions must ultimately answer to the human beings inside them. He has carried that insistence into his own fatherhood. When his children ask about Diana, they receive stories that include the laughter, the contradictions, and the ordinary humanity preserved at Althorpe as well as the official record. That balance is the inheritance he is determined to protect, not with silence, but with the honesty his mother once demanded of the world and that he now demands of himself. William's tears in that private room were never the end of the story. They were the moment the story finally stopped being managed and began to be shared. Diana's legacy belongs to no single household or archive. It belongs to the family who loved her before the world claimed her, and to the children who still ask simple questions that